It is seldom realized that history cannot be cheated, nor can injustice be obliterated with a wink. Truth crushed will rise again in due time. And every community, it is said, must have monuments to serve as beacons of light and landmarks of its own journey through history. Sir Udo Udoma, 1987. Igwenga Ibekwe Ikorabasi town, every month of December the 16th, is a day of mourning. A memorable day it has been in this great historic river port town of the Ibibios of the Imo estuary in what is today Akwa Ibom State, Nigeria. One of their saddest days happened in the morning of December the 16th of 1929. It was terrifying, most tragic, brutal, and most painful. This woman, honorary chief in the town, a historian and woman activist, Obon Ngowon Edith Etete, she begins the sad day alone in this epitaph and memorial tomb by the beach in the town.
Soul of Mary Nzekwe Opobo, rest in peace. Oruba,
she makes a roll call of some names who were murdered in cold blood on that tragic December the 16th of 1929.
Umoko Ogoni, rest in peace.
Her yearly prayers for each of them, all women whose names are now in marble in the town's Hall of Fame. This befitting Women's Memorial Center in Ikorabasi town is the Hall of Fame. And the heroines in the Ikorabasi massacre were 33 in number. One of them was from the city of Lagos. Others came from Opobo across the river. Some others were from up and downstream the river to the Andonis and Ogonis, while the rest were from Ikorabasi. At that time it was known as Igwenga. All in what is today Akwa Ibom and Rivers State. But in 1929 they were all under Opobo division in the Calabar province, with this town of Igwenga as the divisional headquarters. The women, until that tragic December the 16th morning of 1929, lived as housewives, mothers, matriarchs in their respective towns in the old Opobo division. They had all gathered here on the invitation of the divisional officer, a Briton by name Mr. A.R. Whiteman, and met that terrifying event where 33 of them were brutally murdered in cold blood. Also in this other Akwa Ibom town of Utuetimekpo, every 13th day of December is a memorable day. Their women were gunned down during the rampage against alien rule in their town. 18 of them in number. Now this is about the historic uprising against British colonial rule by olden day women of southeastern Nigeria in 1929. Their grievances,
how the uprising started, the extent of its spread in the entire Calabar and Owerri provinces, what later came to be known today as the Southeast and South-South geopolitical zones, the untold casualties of the times inflicted on the women during the uprisings. All these and more as we begin the series, Fighting for Justice, the story of the Women's War of 1929, a popular uprising in Nigeria's colonial history by olden-day women of southeastern Nigeria. Today's episode, the wildfire from Oloko Bend.
(1929) belonged to the lost century. In the year 2015, it will be 86 years ago when the women of southeastern Nigeria revolted against British rule. The heroines of that war were mothers, matriarchs, some in their 50s, early 60s, and others may have been in their late 20s and mid-30s, but they were all housewives. No teenager or single lady joined them in that historic one-month-old uprising. If any of them is alive today, she may be close to 125 years of age, even more, including those who witnessed the event. Until her death in the year 2010, this influential Akwa Ibom veteran journalist and woman activist, Lady Emma Brown, witnessed that brutal killings that day of the massacre here in Igwenga as a 5-year-old. That very day, little Emma was with her father, this early literate Nigerian by name Chief John King Usoro. Chief John Usoro was the interpreter that day the women came to meet with the DO in his office, and 33 of them were gunned down. This was the very office in the town where the sad event took place, at the DO's office. The DO's lodge in Ikorabasi, this brick house, directly opposite the office, also by the beach.
Since the month of November of 1929, most principal areas in the then Owerri and Calabar provinces were in very serious social unrest. Rural market women had taken over most towns of the southeast.
Igbo land, Anang and Ibibio land, the Ogonis, Andonis, Ibanis, Ijos, the Kolukumas, the Calabaris. Women from these areas had risen in one accord to challenge the cruel dictates of colonial rule. Since the forceful event of English colonial agents to their territories, things had fallen apart, and they were no longer at ease, and the women went to war. The outburst first started from this remote Abia State town called Oloko in what is today Ikuano area. But in 1929, Oloko was in Bende district of Aba division in Owerri province. Oloko town in the late 1920s had a customary court and a district office which the indigenes called Ntubu. Ntubu, a late 19th century Igbo for the court and jailhouse. Europeans brought these institutions, the court and the prison yard, to the southeastern interior during the 1900s. Otherwise, they were alien to most cultures in the southeast.
See, in our old culture, there were no prison. You know that you don't send. There was no prison at all. But now they had built prisons and put their men there, and they had to make roads, open roads, so that the colonialists can move around the area. And these roads, they brought in free labor, forced labor, and so men were hardly at home because they had to go out to work, to go to prison. And this did not go down well with the men nor the women.
These buildings here once served as such: a native customary court, jailhouse, law enforcement post and quarters for the employees, mainly the court clerk and the interpreters. Here, between 1918 to 1928, visiting colonial officers to Oloko town were brought from Aba, the divisional headquarters town, on the head and shoulders of able-bodied men in a stretcher-like device called a hammock. The Europeans held a bi-weekly court session here in Oloko, and they were carried back to Aba, about 5 to 7 hour journey on foot. At that time, there were no bicycles or motor cars around.
African women generally, and women of this area in particular, respected their men. In fact, in most cases, they called their men Lord. You know, Nna in Igbo, Abo me in Ibibio. They respect Uko. I remember clearly my grandmother used to call the husband Uko. That is great in battle. I mean, for such people, for another person to come, they used to say, a stranger comes from a strange land to come and lord it over their people in their own land. And this land is no good anymore. So the women did not like it.
Oloko town was under a powerful warrant chief known as Okugo in 1929. British colonial agents made him a warrant chief.
Now, it was very typical of the colonial agents in southeastern Nigeria of the early 20th century. They governed through a class of indigents whom they handpicked and made warrant chiefs in the so-called indirect rule system. And many of the chiefs were disliked by the indigents.
Once anyone appeared very friendly to the colonial agents, he was given a warrant to rule his community on their behalf. Chief Okugo was one of such. All through the provincial areas in the whole eastern region, where this class of men reigned as warrant chiefs, they were massively disliked by the indigents.
Anybody who was a warrant chief became automatically an enemy of the people. He was unpopular because warrant chiefs were known to receive bribes. They were known to even give false reports to the DO that antagonized the DO against the people and the people against it. If the DO said go and collect maybe 20, they went and doubled or tripled the amount and collected. They were so corrupt. And again, basically, they had no natural or traditional right to a chieftaincy's stool. And they were made chiefs in default of the culture and tradition of the place. And so the people were angry that the chiefs, the traditional rulers, the Mbong, had been distilled in favor of a new class of people, some of them known to be slaves, were made warrant chiefs, and the people were against that.
The warrant chiefs were overzealous, and many of them ended up very corrupt. And when the women will revolt, they will be the targets. 1929, Oloko had hired a resident district officer known by the indigents as Wadisi, that is, son, child, or servant of the district commissioner. Here in Oloko, he was an Englishman by name Mr. John Cook. His office, which also doubled as his lodge, is one of these structures in the midst of a growing bush here in Oloko town today. Calabar, 1925. Efik women in this town blew the lead when they revolted against a sudden move by the colonial officials in this town who wanted the women to pay rent on the market stalls which their forefathers had built many centuries ago before the advent of the British colonial agents to their town. That historic market was sited around this area of the town. Some form of tax which the women were to pay every month or lose their stalls. Armed with clubs and sticks, the Calabar market women confronted the colonial authorities head on.
Now that came and went without no such rent paid, but the news of the Calabar women revolt had reached most areas of the southeast, and many of the rural women waited to react like the Efik women if such was imposed on them.
It marked the beginning of the alertness women of southeastern Nigeria had displayed during their contact with the cruel policies of colonial Africa. October 1929, 4 years later, after the Calabar women revolt, something very similar was making its rounds again in the southeast. It was an intending head count of each household, to be followed with taxation this time around. Women will be inclusive. All along, the men had been paying with tears. Offenders were tried and sentenced to indefinite jail terms, in which case women who failed to pay were also to be tried and jailed likewise. The women had risen along this line. In the 1920s, tax evasion were major offenses, and also the popular case tried by the DOs and the customary native law courts. During their rampage, the native law courts or the customary courts will be their targets. 1914, the year of the amalgamation that brought the nation called Nigeria. It was also the year of the First World War. The global economic depression of the times after World War I. It was very severe in the colonies owned by Britain and France. The export-oriented Nigerian economy was agrarian, and it was a traumatic period for the predominantly rural Nigerian population who were mostly farmers. Most of the colonial trading stores who relied on the local goods had gone out of business, and the colonial government needed additional revenue for the implementation of their policies in the post-war depression years. And they arrived at the unfortunate conclusion that direct taxation was the only way funds can be raised in monitoring their indirect rule system. Its implementation stepped on toes in the poverty-stricken economy of the rural women, and they cried out loud. At their various ethnic groups, towns, villages, and hamlets, they discussed the issues amongst themselves. Their leaders met quite often and passed their decisions to other women groups without the warrant chiefs and the colonial administrators knowing their intentions. Markets were usually where the messages were sent and received from those in their long-distance trade journeys. Complaints against the new system were brought to the market for fellow women to hear and further spread to other women in other locations. A case in point happened in this town of Utwetimekpo in 1926, 3 years before the uprisings. A young lady who had just been engaged for marriage by her would-be husband and had just concluded the traditional rite of passage in the fattening room. It was usually followed with a prestigious outing ceremony in the company of her would-be husband after spending time in the fattening room. Usually a happy and joyous day for the young couples. But this very day, the young lady was in tears. She was celebrating alone, without the husband, who was serving some time in jail for tax evasion. Her mother-in-law brought the young bride-to-be to the market for the women to sympathize with her and take note of the strange and wicked dictates that was wrecking their age-long custom. And in no distant time, the news of this humiliating event will reach other women in their various rural environments, and their hatred for the new system will increase. September 1929, Oloko Bende. District Officer Mr. John Cook had compiled a nominal roll of all households in his district for the head count to commence, which will be followed by taxation. Each household in Oloko were to submit to the warrant chief the number of wives and children in each compound, the number of farmlands owned, the number of crops planted, and the number harvested in a one-year period, and last but not the least, the number of domestic animals in each household. Very strange and obnoxious the new dictates, which were in total violation of most of the customs and value systems of the old Southeasterners. Yet the warrant chiefs were very zealous to enforce the colonial dictates in their respective towns and villages.
They must pay.
And the rural market women patiently waited for the implementation of the strange dictates. Here in Oloko Bende was the historic compound of the Ojims. The Ojims had a woman leader by name Wanyerowa in the 1920s. November 23rd, 1929, Olokobende, at the compound of the Ojims, where Wanyerowa was a housewife and woman leader. She was with a fellow wife in the compound along with their matriarch, cracking the hard shells to get the rich and edible palm nuts. Warrant Chief Okugo had detailed a school teacher by name Omerowa to the compound of the Ojims for the head count of each household. That very morning at the Ojims,
tax. You want tax? May you go receipt?
he was asked if he has collected that of his wife and mother. They chased him out of the compound after the brief argument. When local women in the compound arrived to inquire what was happening, and they were told that the taxation of women had started. And so it has happened. That which they have been waiting for has happened. What looked like a mere quarrel soon became an outburst of anger as other women were attracted to the scene.
It has happened though. So they all took up the thing and sent palm front to the different markets on their market days. That it has happened, oh, that is, mobilize your women, or we are going out, or it has happened. So that was what ignited the whole thing from Ogugo's compound. It was Nwayere, whatever, and Mr. Emerowa, who were the people that ignited the fire. And of course, it was not. They had already prepared, so it was just that it is time. Oh,
it has happened. It has happened, shouted the women. In fact, it sounded like a password. In Igbo land, Ibibio, Anangland, Ogoni, Andoni, Ibwani, Ijo, Kalabari, Kolokuma. Whenever the women in these areas had "it has happened," it meant the showdown had started.
Olokobende. The women first stormed Chief Okugo's residence and decapped him.
Now, in the olden days, for a woman to remove the cap of a titled chief, even if it was unintentional, it was seen as a desecration of whatever title the hat or cap represented.
Oloko women went on a decapping spree of their warrant chiefs. It became the practice in the entire southeast during the rampage. No sooner Chief Okugo was decapped, a group headed for the district office complex, where Mr. Cook was the DO. The angry women stormed his house and office complex and burned the Union Jack. November 24th, 1929, Owerinta. This Imo River boundary town along Owerri-Aba Road in Abia State today was the next place to register rampage by its own women after Oloko Bende. Oloko Bende and Owerinta, though, are all in Abia State today, but they are about 70 kilometers away from each other, about 2 market days' journey on foot from either of the towns. But less than 24 hours after Oloko women went on rampage, Owerinta followed suit the next day. British colonial authorities had just finished with the construction of this bridge then, in 1929. It was a hanging bridge and newly built. Between 1924 to 1929, colonial agents had opened up what they called Trunk A roads. This very road then was one of such Trunk A roads which linked Owerri, Aba, and Onitsha. There were telegraph and telephone poles at the corners of the road. The women, numbering over 100, blocked the bridge after they had pulled down the communication poles of the telephone and the telegraph. If they had a device to pull down the hanging bridge, they would have pulled it down, and so they blocked the bridge. This man, Chief Johnson Arrow from Oputa village in Aba town, was already a motor driver in 1929. He drove one of those small cars called Rio for the newly formed United Africa Company, the UAC. In 1989, when the Women's War celebrated its 60th year anniversary, Mr. Johnson Arrow was alive then, though very frail but could hardly talk. He told me he had just crossed the hanging bridge on his way from Onitsha to Aba in the company of his superior, Mr. Thompson, a Briton, and met a crowd of women with sticks chanting, "It has happened, it has happened." On sighting the Briton, Mr. Thompson, in the car, the women gave chase and threw sticks at us. I simply matched the throttle and drove fast, Chief Johnson told me. That same day of Chief Johnson Arrow's Owerinta encounter with the women at the bridge, this man, Elder Obadiah Okafor, had a similar experience. This 1990 film clip with me behind him was when he turned 90 years of age. He was a native of Umaobe, Kenesi, in the Dato South area of Imo State.
I was present when this thing was happening. And I was in college that time, and it was the time we were coming out of college. 1929, by December. I was on the gate. The women went to Bende. When they reached Bende, they began to chase out the DO with his wife. DO stopped them. He said, "Tell me your annoyance." They said they do not want any other thing, that they want Chief Okugo to be imprisoned. DO said, "Oh, cool down." Not only being imprisoned, but they want his servant who beat them to come here and be imprisoned. People say, "I would do that soon." Not only imprison those, bring the staff, the scepter that government used to give to chiefs. His one should be brought here now, and the hat also will be brought here. All this indeed was brought there, and they spoiled them. Then, when they finished at Bende, they came. I was on the top of this gate, and they began to sing. They just sat down somewhere, trying to arrange what they would do with the people selling in the shop. They said, one, that they will not allow their husbands to pay tax again. I interrupted them. Said, don't say that. That has gone to King of England, and that has been registered. It cannot be rescinded. You can talk of other things, that women will not, they say women will not pay tax. Nobody to register or to take their name to pay tax. One bag of rice, one bag of kernel will be sold at the same price. 1 tin of oil and 1 tin of 1 tin of oil and 1 tin of 1 bag of salt will be one price. They began to say all those things. I say, yes, this one you are laying, this law you are laying down is better, but don't say anything about the tax that men pay. That one cannot be rescinded.
November 25th, 1929, the women rampage entered Aba town. Then Aba was gradually evolving into a township, a railway station town, and divisional headquarters, with a popular native market called Ekoha. There were many colonial trading stores, including banks. The first place in Aba women stormed was the bank. Exactly in this very premises of the Union Bank once stood a colonial bank called Barclays Bank DCO. Market women entered the bank, drove all the employees away, and destroyed properties worth 3 shillings and 9 pence.
When we reached Aba station, on the right was a line of policemen up. On the left, a line of soldiers, and we have to travel between them. I stayed in my brother's cell, who was a policeman, John Madaka. I was in his house, attending school in the hall, attending examination in the hall for 3 or 4 days before we finished. At Aba, one white man with his wife were coming from Port Harcourt to Aba. Women met them there and beat them properly. At Aba, women went to the prison and destroyed the defense, released the prisoners, and they ran away. Women had no weapon except the stick of cassava. The women went into the shop, break the shelves. When they carried the bags of coins and money came out, men who are stronger than them beat them and take it away from them. This time, many people became rich because of what they have looted in that time.
They also headed for the resident DO's office. At that time, it was this historic prefab, now the gallery of the National Museum and Monuments, the Museum of Colonial History, Aba. Uredia Obonayo, this old woman, was one of the Aba heroines. She was the last daughter of the influential Chief Obonayo Rapa, who signed the Protection Treaty with the British in 1896. In 1989, Madam Uredia told me she was amongst the women who stormed the DO's office. The following day was November the 26th. A white settler in Aba town knocked down one of the women in Aba with his car. and the women got infuriated the more. November 28 through the 30th, the uprising had engulfed the entire Aba division. All of Ungwa land, Ndoke lands, women burnt down native customary courts and chased the warrant chiefs away after decapping them. Elder Samson Imuka from Ihe town saw the women burn down 2 customary law courts and decapped many of the warrant chiefs in Asa, Obegu, and Ndoke towns. Also in this Ndoke town of Azumini, women in the town destroyed the native customary court and chased 2 warrant chiefs away.
The women were everywhere in the old Aba division, burning down the court buildings and decapping the warrant chiefs, many of whom went into hiding. Colonial authorities became very jittery as the rampage continued without an end in sight in the Aba division.
The colonial lieutenant governor for the eastern provinces cabled Lagos requesting for armed support and authority to invoke the collective punishment ordinance. Sir Graham Thompson was the governor general and was based in Lagos. This man, Colonel Grant of the British Colonial Army, arrived with 3 companies of well-armed soldiers by train to Aba so as to check the revolt. They were mobilized from Lagos. Meanwhile, the resident G.W. Falk in charge of Calabar province arrived at Aba town to request that Calabar province be declared a prohibited area. Movement of people to anywhere in Calabar province be restricted to those in Owerri province, G.W. Falk had requested. But that was too late. The further southeast was the spread, the more violent the uprising, and the more bloody. December 2nd, 1929, on an oil market day in this remote Akwa Ibom town called Ikoto Sukbong, near Ukanafan, in our back area, a woman rushed quickly to break a certain news to fellow women in the market. "It has happened, it has happened," screamed the Anan and Ibibio women in the market. The women returned from the stream with their pots of water. Rather than go and drop the pots first in the house, hurried straight to meet other fellow women in the market, still with the pots on their heads. Upon hearing, "It has happened, it has happened," in no distant time, Anang land will be burning. While Anang towns in what is today Akwa Ibom were under siege, in Owerri province, women had gathered and marched to Olokobende again. Olokobende, November 29th, where the uprising first started. Women from Aba and those from Owerri province, including many of them from Ibibio country, had gathered here in front of the district officer's building, refusing to disperse until their request that Chief Okugo be imprisoned was met. This man, Godson Echerodo, was 5 years old then. He saw the women as they headed to Oluko from his hometown of Mbeke in Isi Alambano area of Imo State. Leaders from each women group took time to address the mammoth crowd of fellow women that day until Mr. John Cook consented to the demands of the raging women. Chief Okugo was handcuffed, tried by 3 district officers who came from Aba town. During the trial, no woman was allowed inside the native court building except some elders of the menfolk. The women were outside chanting until the pronouncement that Chief Okugo had been jailed for 6 months and the mammoth crowd dispersed. Having sentenced Chief Okugo for local town to 6 months in jail, colonial authorities believed it will calm the situation. They were wrong. At the Akwa Ibom towns of Ikoto Sukbong and Ikotamo, warrant chiefs were decapped and native court buildings also set ablaze. December 3rd, 1929, Okanafan, a platoon of the colonial army arrived this town of Okanafan and moved on to Ika and Utuetimekpo. Another platoon under the command of Captain John Benford, along with a police officer by name Milos, arrived this town of Ikotekpene. They were further reinforced with another platoon under the command of Lieutenant Ford. Their mission was to halt the supposed advance of over 3,000 women who were going to attack the district headquarters here in Ikotekpene. While the soldiers laid their ambush for the women in Ikotekpene, in this other Akwa Ibom town called Utuetimekpo, the angry women burnt down 2 native administrative buildings and set ablaze 2 colonial trading stores, the GBO Levant and John Holt trading companies. As usual, the women organized themselves in groups and sang their way to the DO's office complex, armed with wooden pistols for pounding from their kitchens. But they ran into Captain James' platoon, who ordered the shootings of the women. After heavy machine gun fire, 13 women lay dead on the ground, 26 were injured, and the rest scampered for safety. December 13, Captain Ford, Commissioner of Police in the Eastern Province, the district officer for Uyo, and Lieutenant Browning arrived with soldiers to Utuetimekpo. The soldiers marched their way to this town of Abak and met another build-up of angry women. They fired to disperse them at this very market area close to the post office. In the process, 3 of the women were killed by stray bullets and about 10 of them were injured. While the towns of Abak, Uyo, Ikotekpene, Ikotosukpong, Utuetimekpo were under chaos, all seemed very quiet in this other Akwa Ibom town of Ikwenga, Ikorabasi. In this other town of Opobo, downstream the Imo River, called Queenstown, around October of 1929, lived a woman by name Mary Uranta in the Uranta compound of Queenstown, Opobo, and a chief by name Mark Pepple Jaja. The chief had seized the livestock of Madame Uranta for refusing a head count of her household. The woman paddled across this river upstream to Ikwenga, where their women leader, Madame Adiaga Edem, lived. The following day, a group of the angry women here in Ikorabasi confronted the DO in Ikwenga and met 2 other DOs. One of them was Mr. K.V. Hortish, the district officer in Ikotekpene. He was the one who gave them this note in his own writing. Those who say women are to be taxed are telling lies. Women are not to be taxed. Armed with this assurance, the women in the Opobo division kept their cool, even before the uprising started at Oloko Bende. 14 December 1929, at the compound of their leader, Madame Adiara Edem, a woman rushed with the breaking news. The uprising had reached Utuetimekpo and Abak. Many women had been killed. Some of the women killed at Utuetimekpo and Abak were well known by some women here in Ikorabasi. They painfully mourned their sudden death. The women town crier bicycled around the villages to mobilize all women. Messages were also dispatched to the riverine towns of Andoni, Ogoni, and Opobo. Adiara Edem, this woman in this statute breaking the colonial rifle with her knees, was their leader. She was the mother of one of Nigeria's early and eminent legal practitioners and Chief Judge, Justice Udo Udoma, now of blessed memories. Igwenga Ikorabasi. Women staged a peaceful protest by walking around this town, singing in protest against the killings at Utuetimekpo and Abak. That very day of the protest march, Divisional Officer A.R. Whiteman became very jittery. He sent word across to the women inviting them to his office the following day. Same day of the 15th of December 1929, the DO sent for troops on the rumors that the native court, post office, and dispensary in the town have been singled out for destruction by the women. That night, 32 policemen were drafted from the neighboring inland town of Eseni, while a platoon of the army under the command of Captain John Hill arrived at Consular Beach. This very jetty today, a historical place in the town known as Point of No Return. In the days of slavery and the trade, most Ibibios were exported out as slaves from here. 16 December 1929, the women, numbering over 200, gathered in this very area of the town by the beach near the DO's office. Inside the DO's office that day were the court messenger, the DO's orderly, and the interpreter, Mr. John Usoro. His 5-year-old daughter, Emma Usoro, was with him. The divisional officer also sent for the warrant chiefs. The 3 of them arrived and patiently waited for him. Their presence will further infuriate the women. Enter the DO, Mr. A.R. Whiteman. After a brief ceremony with his staff inside his office, he continued to his inner office, very unmindful of the crowd of women outside waiting for him. The women continued to draw his attention. At last he comes out. Madam Adiaga Edem, the leader, begins to speak. They had written down their grievances. That government will not tax women. No personal property such as boxes is to be counted. Any woman who is a prostitute should not be arrested. Women are not to be charged rent for the use of common market shade. Chief Macpepu Jaja should be removed as head chief of Opobo town. No man should pay tax. Mr. Usoro makes the interpretation. Not pleased with the DO's response, the women tried to force their way inside the office. What happened next was the most tragic. The shootings had begun. The DO had ordered the shooting. At very close range, the trigger-happy soldiers of Captain Hill opened fire on the women. 33 of them dropped dead instantly, including their leader, Madam Adiaga Edem. In the confusion that followed, under heavy gunfire, many of the women who came from the neighboring riverine town ran toward the beach for their canoes. A lot of them got drowned in the process, while on a stampede to escape.
And so, who were these women? Was the head count and taxation their only grievance? How were they able to bring themselves together and organize such a complex and intricate communication network which confused the authorities of their times, despite their ethnic differences, yet successfully organized a widespread uprising which covered an area more than 8,000 square kilometers in just a couple of days? All this and more in our next episode as we conclude the series, Fighting for Justice.
So carry pikin so.